Well, it's the Queen's birthday on Tuesday, May the 24th. Well, it's Queen Victoria's 203rd birthday. And you may have noticed she's no longer alive, but we're still celebrating her birthday. And yeah, some people think it's the Queen Elizabeth's birthday, but that would be wrong. It's not hers. She actually had her birthday in April 21st, and she's 96. She's getting up there. Yeah. So this weekend, we're probably all, on account of this being the case, we're all probably thinking about royalty and the monarchy and that sort of thing. It's kind of on our minds constantly, being the May 24th weekend. And ironically or interestingly, just this past week, Prince Charles and Lady Camilla, is that what we call her, were here in Canada doing a bit of a tour. Apparently they were up in the Yukon at the end of it, and then today they're heading home or something like that. I'm not keeping close track. And ironically or interesting, I heard our Prime Minister some of the countries are the part of the Commonwealth nations in the Caribbean are pulling away. They're dropping the Queen, and she will no longer be their head of state. So the question was asked our Prime Minister, whilst Prince Charles was in the country, whether we thought we'd be dropping the monarchy anytime soon. I don't know if you heard this, and he hedged a bit on that one. He said, "Whoa, well, we got a lot pretty serious other matters to be considering and dealing with at this time, so it's not even on our radar." I paraphrase, but something like that. So there is much that can be said pro-monarchy, anti-monarchy, and if we got into that debate, we'd have a serious argument and maybe some hurt feelings in our hands, because some of you are staunchly monarchist, and others are staunchly anti-monarchist. I have these, both sides in my acquaintances and family. So I'm not even going to go there, because I get in trouble enough for doing other things. So, but it's an intriguing entity, and helps. Part of the advantage of it is kind of having an understanding of royalty and monarchy and stuff like that as a metaphor, if nothing else. I was intrigued when our son entered the military. When he joined, the very day he joined and he got sworn in, he had to swear allegiance to the Queen. We were like, what? And sure enough, he did. And we heard recently a friend of ours that has lived in Canada most of her life, but has not become a Canadian citizen because she'd have she said she thought she'd have to swear allegiance to the Queen. And Lynn and I were talking about this week. I thought, that doesn't sound right. That can't be true. Well, it is. If you're an outsider, you come to Canada, you want to become a citizen, you have to either swear or affirm your allegiance to the Queen to become a Canadian citizen, because she is the head of state, officially and legally in our country. The closest thing, interestingly, ironically, those of us who were born as citizens never have had to do that. We just automatically, I guess it's presumed we have allegiance to the Queen. It's innate. It's born into us. I don't know. Now, the closest thing I have was when I was a wolf cub. And I think every week when we got together as a wolf cub, but you guys know what wolf cubs are, right? Before scouts, you're a cub. Before cubs, you're a beaver. And anyway, so the pledge that we said each week, I think we did this. We said, I promise to do my best, to do my duty to God and the Queen, to keep the law of the wolf cub pack, and to do a good turn for somebody every day. Anybody remember that? No? And then there was all kinds of secret stuff like dib, 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 dob, 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 which I can't tell you about because, I was sworn to secrecy. But do my best to do my duty to God and the Queen. So it was built in. So historically, the state of the world historically has been mainly there have been kings and queens that have ruled the lands. And still do in some instances in our world. Sometimes they come by other names like president and such, but they're essentially emperors and Caesars and rulers and dictators and such. But the main advantage of having a king or queen for the average Jane or Joe down through the centuries has been protection. So that would be the argument that the king or the queen would make to assure people that they needed them. The people, you need us to be ruling over you. And this in two ways, which roughly correspond to like the internal needs and external needs. And we've always had those as in human society. So internally, kind of corresponding to the function of police now, you have to have some way, people want some way to protect them from people stealing, for instance, or people killing. And there being some kind of a repercussion or something to kind of slow people down from doing that. So a good king, or the idea of the king, was that they would make sure that that happened. And usually back in times past, it was the military that would fulfill that function. So like in Jesus' day, the Roman military did a lot of policing function. But also, if there was the threat of someone coming from the outside that was going to come and kill you or take your land or destroy it in some way, then you have a good, strong military in place, and they would protect you from all that. Because countries were always trying to take over countries. And for some reason, still, people are thinking that they should do that today, which is pretty stupid. Anyway, so generally speaking, not that you necessarily had a choice, but at some point there was some choosing early in history, as some family became, the local tribe chief and then maybe the king, etc. At some point they had to get the okay from the rest of the tribe. And generally speaking, you look for someone who was, and I got a few things, who was strong, physically strong. They would want somebody that was, probably really capable in warfare and able to wield a sword, for instance, and maybe a spear and a shield and that sort of thing. The Bible has a lot of illustrations about these things. So early on in the Bible, just before the Tower of Babel story, so it's about Genesis 9, 10, or 11, somewhere in there, we hear this, and then there was this guy Nimrod, who was a mighty hunter before the Lord. And he was kind of like one of the first ruler types. And he was clearly some guy that had a lot of prowess and strength. You'd want them to be gifted for leadership, like someone that possibly was somewhat charismatic, could talk a good story, and get people to follow them and urge them on when it was time for battle, etc., like that. So you want something like that. Possibly you'd like them to be good looking, but that's probably not a strong one. And hopefully that they might be smart. They might be intelligent people, because a lot of times they would be the final judge in the land, like the kings of Israel, and that they would have wisdom. Remember, Solomon is asked. God says, "What do you want?" And he's praying to God, and God says, "What do you want?" He says, "Well, I could sure use some wisdom, because these people, there's a lot of them, and how I'm supposed to rule them and judge between them. I could use some wisdom." So God says that's a good request. But also, for a leader of the people who would be involved in warfare, to know how to do, tacticals and to be a good tactician, when it came to battle. And so that's kind of how people would come into that role. And of course, all through history, they're a mixed bag. Some of them are wonderful people. Some few of them seem to be wonderful people who really had a heart for their subjects, and had their best interests at heart, and others who seem to be psychopathic, crazy people. A lot of them. Maybe we just hear about them. They're more recorded in the history books. I don't know. You want to know more about this? Go and read your Old Testament. Oh my goodness. The Hebrew Scriptures. There's 6 books that are pretty much 6 big books in the Old Testament are chock full of the stories of the kings of Israel and of Judah. They would be 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. Good. You are so learned. 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Okay. I'm reading Chronicles right now, so this is why I'm well aware of this. So I mean, there are stories of really good, like David, who is a man after God's own heart, really, was by and large a good king, and people loved him, and he had a heart for them. Hezekiah, there's a smattering of them that are good, and then there's some just horrid ones who just do terrible things. They do great evil. They kill their own children. These are the kings of Judah and of Israel. I'm just reading one right now in Chronicles about, so one of the kings, and I forget the name because the names all sound the same. They're Ahaziah and Azariah and Athaliah and Joel and Joash and Joab. A lot of these names sound similar, but I forget which king. So he dies quite young. He gets killed in battle. and he's like 40s or something. And he does have a batch of kids, but his mother takes over the rule. Queen Athaliah, the horrible. It doesn't say the horrible. She is horrible. And so she has all her son's heirs killed so that she will retain power. Her grandchildren. It's wild. And except they hide one away. They hide one away. And so it's like her daughter or her aunt, the aunt of the child, some woman takes the baby and hides the baby away. Now there's a theme, you may never have heard this, it runs through the Bible, the Old Testament, and they call it the scarlet thread. And it's really the lineage of Jesus. And if you go through, there's time and time again as you run through the Old Testament where it almost gets snuffed out. We're down to like one person. And this is the classic case in point. So this baby is hidden away, and the queen rules the land and brings in all the other gods and stuff for about 6 years, 6 or 7 years. Then the high priest Jehoiada, he decides that it's time to bring forth the child and crown him and declare him to be king. He's 7. And he gathers, the military and the Levites and the priests and stuff, and they do that. They crown him at the temple. And the queen gets word of it. And she yells, "Treason, treason!" So they have to kill her. So that's, and so this king, he starts reigning when he's like 7 years old. So, it's a wild ride, the story of the kings of Judah and of Israel in the Old Testament. And it's not a wonder, eventually they get taken off into captivity, if you will, if you remember that story. So when we hear about the ascension of Jesus, we need to keep this in mind, because this is the context in which the story unfolds. So the people, our first century Christians, the writers of the New Testament, this was their world. They lived in a world of crazy royalty intrigues and assassinations and amazing power that people wielded, especially the emperors, the Roman emperors of their day. And so that you need to have that in mind, and also for the Jewish people especially, this whole history of the sons and the children of David, who eventually was to produce the Messiah, who was supposed to be the ultimate king. Okay. So that's all kind of in the background here. So time-wise, Ascension Day is this coming Thursday. So it's in Acts, we're told that after Jesus rose from the dead, he appeared he showed himself with many proofs over a period of 40 days. So again, you get the 40-day thing, which is a theme all through the Bible. So after 40 days, he's shown himself with many proofs. So he didn't just show himself a couple times. 40 days. It's from the time of Easter till this Thursday. It's that long that Jesus was showing himself after he was resurrected to his disciples. So that's why they were pretty convinced by the time they were charged with the proclaiming of the word. So that would actually start up at 10 days after the 40 days. So that's Pentecost, which is 2 weeks from today. And that will, by the way, we're having communion that day. So just so you're aware, and we'll have a communion letter out probably the next week. So, but the Thursday, so 10 days before Pentecost is this coming Thursday. So some people celebrate Ascension Sunday next Sunday. Some do this one. It's just in the middle of the week. I choose this one. And so Jesus is meeting with his disciples. He takes them up to the Mount of Olives, and then he just disappears. He just floats off into the heavens and disappears in a cloud. And they're all like, huh? You can kind of picture it. There's lots of visuals online if you want to go. If you could get online. Benoit, you can. You should. So, so they're all watching, and then angels appear, and an angel says to them, "Why are you looking up into heaven? This same Jesus who you see going up into heaven will come back in the same way, with the clouds of heaven." So, and that was the belief of the early church, that Jesus would return with the clouds of heaven with great power and glory. And it's written in our text. Now, Paul, this is a prayer, as Gwen pointed out, this is a prayer that Paul is describing to the Ephesian people, the Ephesian church, the kind of prayer he has for them. But he does a lot of teaching in his prayer, or in his description of how he's praying for them. And he lumps the resurrection and the ascension together here, just in one big swoop. It's kind of like, so, well, let's read it. And his incomparably great power for us who believe. That power is like the working of his mighty strength, which he exerted in Christ when he raised him from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly realms. So Paul is describing, this is great power. God raised this man from the dead, and he doesn't even pause for the 40 days here. He just brings him right up, ascends him to the right hand. He ascended him, he raised him from the dead, seated him at his right hand in the heavenly realms, far above all rule and authority, power and dominion, and every title that can be given, not only in the present age, but also in the one to come. So he doesn't mess around. He's not mincing words here. He is telling us about the lordship of Jesus Christ, the lordship of Jesus Christ, the sovereign lordship of Jesus. And this would have been subversive in his day, by the way. He was playing with fire here. He was doing something quite risky, because if you listen, so this is true, even the skeptics don't argue that this was written in the first century. Everybody agrees that this was written in the first century when Rome ruled. And a lot of the Roman emperors were tyrants, like, you've heard of Nero and guys like that. But he says, far above all rule and authority, power and dominion, and every title that can be given, not only in the present age, but also in the one to come. So this would have had to be in a document that people would have had to have kept from the powers that be, or you could easily get in a lot of trouble. So this was an underground document in the first century that we have in all our Bibles now. Pretty wild, really. Because it was subversive, and that's what got a lot of the Christians in the early church in trouble, because their saying was, Jesus is Lord. And Rome was rather huffed about that, because they wanted you to say, Caesar is Lord. And so there's a whole tenor running in an undercurrent in the New Testament of this kind of subversive nature, where they're saying, yeah, the real boss, the real Lord, the real king is Jesus Christ, not Caesar. And, they got in trouble. Now, the astonishing thing about Jesus, or one of the astonishing things about Jesus, is the meeting of great power and great humility. I mean, we have the power described here, but also all through the New Testament, we have the humility described. One at the same time. Philippians 2 is the classic passage. This is the next book over, and it's possibly an early hymn that Paul quotes. And he says, Jesus did not count equality with God something to be grasped. Just think about that. He did not count equality with God, that he was equal with God, he was God the Son, something to be grasped, something to be bragged about, something to, be all up, that you're all that important about. He didn't count, like we're like that. When we get a little bit of power, or authority or position, it tends to go to our heads, just across the board. It's really, really hard for us to not let it get puffed up by some position that we have. There's a saying, you've probably heard it, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I've heard it was attributed to Diefenbaker. I don't know if that's true. But and actually it's not true. That saying is not true. Because God has absolute power, and he is absolutely not corrupt. So it's not true. However, there is truth to it. And that's people try to float things to us as absolutes, which often they're not, although there may be truth to them. So there is truth to it. And we strongly tend to be corrupted once we have this sense of authority, power, position. Not Jesus. Completely, utterly humble. Completely, utterly meek. His whole heart was always to be a servant. Always. And so that passage in Philippians continues, although he was equal with God, he did not count equality with God something to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant. Being found in human form, he humbled himself and was obedient unto death, even death on a cross. So he goes from the highest to the lowest. And then in the next line, therefore, God has highly exalted him and given him the name which is above every name, that at the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow, every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. It kind of echoes this passage here in some ways. You can kind of hear the same understanding of Jesus in the passages. So that's wild. He is at one and the same time absolutely powerful and absolutely humble. Amazing, our King. Now, if all the kings and queens of the world had been like that, we would probably never have needed or wanted a democracy. Why would we need one? We had perfect rule. So, I'm not saying anything against democracy, by the way. I'm not subversive in that sense. So, but what are, or who are these that Paul's referring to? The rule and authority, power, dominion, and every title that can be given. What is he actually talking about that we can refer to in our world, in our lives? Are those things in play? Now, there's a lot of theological debate about this, and some will point out that in Ephesians, a lot of those terms refer to spiritual beings, like principalities and powers of darkness, he talks about in Ephesians 6. Very similar. So that there are spiritual entities. And Paul says quite clearly, we are not at war with flesh and blood. We as Christians, if we're in a battle, we're in a spiritual battle. And it's not against flesh and blood. It's not against human beings. It's against principalities and powers. Spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. He's quite clear about that. And that's part of this. But this refers to basically everything, every kind of institution or authority or power of humankind and, I guess, angelic kind. Jesus is above all of those, is what he's saying. Clearly, he means every person in every position of power. And for me, hopefully for you, that's comforting. Whatever those powers and positions and authorities are, Jesus is way above them. And he uses the superlative here. He doesn't say he's above, he says far above. Far above. Now, so what might those powers be that influence us and are in our world? How about politics? Not supposed to talk about politics and religion, but we're talking about both today. Political, I mean, it's pretty huge. It has a lot to do with how we live our lives and, what we can do, what we can't do, the laws of our land, how much taxes we're going to pay, which is a pretty big issue, and a whole lot of other things. You might want to consider those as you vote in the provincial election just now. And we have all these levels of it. We have municipal, we have county, then we have provincial, and we have federal. Then beyond that, you might say United Nations, NATO. There's multi-nation powers in the political world. Or judicial powers. The courts, the police, they have a lot of power. You end up in court. You don't want to end up in court. I can tell you right now. I've been to court and I've watched, and it's not pleasant, really. And it's scary. Because they can throw you in jail. They can fine you. They can do stuff, to your family. And none of these powers, I'm not saying any of these powers are evil or good. They're just power. And they can be used for evil or they can be used for good. Scientific power. It's a big one in our world today. That includes all the medical things that are going on. I mean, that's scientific power. This pandemic that we've just had has shown the power of the scientific community. I mean, because they have advised the political powers, and that's changed their lives. Because the scientific powers have said, it's proven that this is a dangerous virus. It's proven that it will kill you. It's proven that you need to protect yourself. And here's the proven protections scientifically that will help. Masks, vaccines, and they show the stats and they show the proof. That's scientific power. It's a lot of it out there. Media power. That's a big power. It changes lives and changes thinking. Whether you watch CNN or you watch Fox, right? Or you watch CP24 or CBC. But, they're influencing people's thinking, and that changes the world. There was a saying that the pen is mightier than the sword. And that's media. And now it's reflected in television and the internet. Social media. Stuff on Facebook is changing our world. Because people will buy into a whole delusion, for instance, and it's disrupting our society. Economic powers. I wish I'd studied economics, because I have no idea what's going on. Banking, stock market, all that. So right now, what used to a couple of months ago cost $6 is now costing 10. Okay. Why? Somebody's got a lot of power. There's power at play here. And I'm not sure if all that can be, I know that the price of gas has gone up, but really? Enough to warrant those prices hikes? So I'm a little questioning some of that. But there's power in economics because it affects our buying power in our lives. Organizational power. I belong to the United Church of Canada. I'm under their authority. I'm influenced by them. It affects my life. Some of us are under the influence of the health system or the school board or whatever. They have power. So you get the picture. The thing is, Paul is saying, Jesus Christ is over them all. He is over them all. He can veto them. He can use them, and does. He can allow them. He can curb them, whatever. We don't understand why he does and doesn't do some things and does do other things. We don't know. But Scripture tells us that, it says, your thoughts are not my thoughts, nor are your ways my ways. As the heavens are high above the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts, says the Lord. But he does what he does in love and wisdom. Ultimately, all the powers answer to him. But meantime, he uses them to watch over us, but he also guards us from the damage they can do. He watches over us, but he protects us because they often get it wrong. Now, so that's kind of the overview here. But this is in the context of a prayer, and Paul's talking about this power in relation to the power that is flowing into our lives from the ascended Jesus Christ, the resurrected. So the ascension of Jesus also releases, it says here, his incomparably great power for us who believe. So there's great power at work in your life if you are a believer in Jesus Christ. It's this power. Christ is sharing his power with us, the resurrection life, the ascended Jesus. And this power transforms us, changes us on a day-to-day basis. It enables us to serve and love and speak the truth and to live in joy and peace and in faith. Jesus has ascended, and he is indeed Lord of lords and King of kings. Let's pray.